Welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise, a podcast about living with ME and chronic illness, creativity, and making meaning. We have a different sort of episode today. Just after World ME Day, I spoke to Nicola Jeffrey and Steve Topple from the Chronic Collaboration. So we're talking about campaigning for change for people with ME and intersecting chronic illness conditions. I want to make a really clear statement as a disclaimer that the views expressed in this episode are those of the Chronic Collaboration and not necessarily those of myself, Dov, or Post-Exertional Mayonnaise podcast. Many listeners and viewers in the UK who have been around the ME community for some time will be aware that there are challenges and often a lack of coordinated approach to campaigning between the different ME organisations and those who set out to represent us. There is criticism in this episode of how things have been done or not done historically, specifically in the area of campaigning. I want to stress that it's important to acknowledge the positive work that our ME organisations have been doing. For example, I've personally used a support helpline in the past when I was very stressed about a benefits situation and there wasn't anyone else around to offload to. Just having a listening ear there when I needed it was so helpful. It's also always encouraging to see announcements of research funding coming from our ME organisations. What has been missing is perhaps an expression of anger. It can often feel that there's a passivity in trying to tear down deep-seated perceptions and understandings about ME within society. Maybe politeness doesn't cut it. Sometimes anger is extremely draining, but without it, we rarely see change. So we need allies. I love to see Nicola on social media video feeds with her fist in the air in defiance. And when you see and hear Nicola and Steve's interview, you'll understand why direct action is so important to both herself and Steve. Apologies that we have a little technical issue at times with an echo briefly, but please bear with us, it doesn't last long. It just comes back a little bit later. And for those of you watching on YouTube, if you want to know why I'm wearing a zebra print hat, you'll need to stay tuned until the end of the episode. I'm really pleased to be joined by Steve Topple and Nicola Jeffrey in this episode. They have set up and are running the Chronic Collaboration, a resistance movement for chronically ill and disabled people and our allies. They're joining the dots between conditions, resisting psychologization, fighting for justice and equality. So there's a lot in that, even in that sort of statement, there's quite a lot there, isn't there? So you guys were out really busy on the Sunday before we recorded this in London, sort of campaigning for at media outlets, weren't you? And about an accurate portrayal of ME and chronic illness in kind of like in those media outlets or through those media outlets. So thanks for all your work. And I just thought I'd read some tweets of feedback. Kind of somebody said, "Thank you for being the voice of those too ill to speak or be heard." That was Joe. Somebody said, "Well done, Nicola. We know the post-exertional malaise that you will have, but today you are amazing for us all. Thank you." And a journalist and friend of the show, Holly Ann Brooks, said, "The admiration I have for everyone involved in this, thank you." So there's something that you're doing that's like really resonating. Before we kind of get into the sort of nuts and bolts of it all, do you want to tell us, Nicola, a little bit about your own chronic illness story, just to kind of get to know you a little bit, and then we'll kind of get onto how you've sort of progressed to the sort of chronic collaboration, if that's all right.
No, it's absolutely fine. It's quite a long story and I've had to kind of write it out. So I'm really sorry if you kind of see me reading this, but basically, long story short, when I was in my late teens, I worked in central London. I unfortunately caught glandular fever, which is otherwise known as the EBV virus. My health deteriorated and I was given a diagnosis of depression and fibromyalgia. In my early 20s, I gave birth to my son. The relationship with his dad led to us escaping to a refuge due to domestic violence. While I was there, I was sectioned, as social services believed I was making my illnesses up. This then meant that the domestic violence case was dropped. I immediately fought the sectioning by using legal aid, and I was released 9 days later 5 minutes before my tribunal with no mental health disorder. But it meant that I then had to spend the next 2 years fighting for full residency and custody of my son, which I was eventually given. I have repeatedly had my health used against me and was told to do things like guided exercise therapy and low FODMAP diet. At one point, I was even living on £20 a week child benefit, and this went on for 2 years because the DWP refused to give me any other support. My symptoms really worsened during that time throughout my 20s, and I was referred to various different hospital departments. I've literally got 4 or 5 folders, A4 folders, that are full of just different departments, different tests, different things. I'm aged 30. I met Steve whilst I was out campaigning, along with raising a crowdfunder to help me find some answers to my health. We also requested my full medical record, my full medical file, which I think is very important for people to do. We were finally able to discover during that time I'd actually been living with epilepsy, EDS, AAI and CCI, which is instabilities in my neck. I was living with POTS, gastroparesis, dumping syndrome, ME, mitochondrial dysfunction, and just various food intolerances that were all just dismissed as poor lifestyle and mental health. I also discovered that the sectioning had been down to my son's dad's mum, who was working in mental health at the time. And obviously that meant that all the domestic violence, it just all got dropped. And I was never able to take that on because I found out so many years later. So that's the sort of long story short of what really kind of went on and how I ended up getting to the point where I just wanted to find out why people are being treated like this. And it made me angry, and realizing that there are so many other people in this position, we had to do something. So
that is a very long story short, and maybe it'd be good to like talk further in the future and have a separate one, and like because I would love to it would be great to kind of dive deeper into that. But you've been through a lot, and
it's been interesting.
Yeah, and I'm just aware that you've got like a massive Daniel Blake sort of poster behind you, and
we were actually invited to the premiere, and I actually got to meet Ken Loach through a really good friend of ours, Paula Peters, who's an activist for DPAC. We were able to go, and she's been a massive inspiration as well. So yeah, I'm very proud of that.
If anybody's not seen the film, do make an effort to see it, because it's
definitely
it tells a very bleak story of the UK benefit system. And I'm just aware that like we're recording this, and obviously we're probably like talking about issues within the UK, but they kind of like span out, don't they, internationally, very much in terms of different countries taking like a lead from each other and things like that, don't, and in terms of approaches towards things. And what we talk about, the biopsychosocial approach, that's kind of like gone all over the world due to kind of things that have happened in this country as well, hasn't it? So so what was the process in terms of like, obviously you guys met, and then you sort of you've thought a lot about kind of what the gaps are in the problems, I suppose, in making a voice heard within kind of like the media, within society, within just generally in people's sort of consciousness about disability, but also about chronic illness. And you've done quite a bit on ME, and sort of where did you kind of, obviously you've had that kind of narrative of having to fight your own battles, haven't you? And then there's been something in you that's kind of wanted to push this further and make it into something else. How did that work between the two of you? Was it just sort of conversations that came up, or thinking like what's
if we explain how we actually met. So we actually met. I joined finally in 2015. I had access to internet. I was finally able to get online and actually start researching things away from just what GPs and things people were telling me. I come across DPAC, which is Disabled People Against Cuts, and they at the time were fighting the government over benefits. So my brain's gone blank, but basically it was just the way that the government were treating disabled people, benefits, and exactly what you just said. And they were blocking London Bridge for the day. And we were actually doing a roadblock, and Steve was the journalist that had come and was reporting on it. So that was literally how we met.
So yeah, and then you've kind of like got together, and then you've sort of thought, okay, what would this sort of look like, and what? So maybe you just tell us a bit about the chronic collaboration, how, and sort of like how it's sort of like developed in your minds, and then you've kind of turned it into something that's been an initial kind of like just a tiny seed of something, and then it's kind of like it's grown, and you've recently launched your website and things like that. So yeah, what is it? What does it look like to you?
Want me to go?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah.
So the thing with mine and Nicola's approach to, I suppose, activism, campaigning, and awareness raising comes from a more political background than necessarily something passive that we felt the chronic illness communities more broadly were kind of engaging with. We met on a roadblock, which, if we were trying to do that now,
it's fitting.
We did it a few months ago with Deepak, and the police kind of used already existing powers to try and shut the roadblock down, and they kind of kettled wheelchair users, and but this was back in 2016, and things were slightly more relaxed then, and so you could block Westminster Bridge for hours on end, and the police couldn't do anything about it. So that's how we met, doing direct action to raise awareness of what are essentially life and death issues, and we've done that for years. Be it roadblocks, be it occupying Parliament, which again we did on several occasions. These kind of in-your-face, direct, not messing around kind of protests, which highlight, extremely important issues. And the process that we've been on since sort of 2018, when Nicola got really ill, and we started taking drastic action to try and, in some respects, save her life, but as a minimum, improve her health, led us to become more involved with what was going on in chronic illness communities. And we realised that, the kind of political and direct action approach, which we were so used to, wasn't to be found really in these communities. And of course, it's not going to be found because by definition, chronically ill people cannot get out and protest, cannot block roads, cannot do all the things that we were doing and people we associated with were doing. And that combined with the fact that so many chronic illnesses are intersecting. So, for example, Nicola, like, qualitative work that ME Action has done and has shown that potentially 50% of people with ME also live with one of the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes. But all these charities and entities work separately. Whereas actually in real life, a lot of people have crossovers with conditions, be it ME, be it EDS, be it POTS, and yet there's all these separate organisations doing their own individual work, and no one is bringing it all together at all. There was one group we saw, which was Chronic Inclusion, which I don't believe is hardly doing anything anymore now anyway. So it came from direct experience we'd had of how we protested other issues. It came from Nicola's experience as a chronically ill person. Going around the NHS, everything's fragmented and compartmentalised, and that was the same in campaigning and advocacy and charity work. And we just thought, well, this ain't working, is it? There's a clear gap here for what really needs to be done. And you said it yesterday because we were running through like what we were going to say today, and you were just like, Nicola's response to that was, well, someone's got to do it. And so we're like, well, we may as well just do it. And try and join all these dots together and bring something more active in terms of protests and campaigning to chronic illness communities. Because look, let's be real, and I know you want to talk about the charities, particularly within the ME community. If stuff that these mainstream well-funded charities had been doing had been working, things would have changed. And, people who follow us and who have been watching what we're doing know that Millie and Carla are in identical positions to what Sophia Mertzer was back in the 2000s. Nothing has changed. So, and we were just like, well, someone's got to do something. So that's kind of how it came about. And obviously it started with the NICE guidelines, the delaying of them publishing the updated guidelines for ME. So, yeah.
Yes. There's a sense, I mean, like for me, and sort of we're kind of wanting to keep the podcast kind of quite independent, really, but there's a sense that there is, like, even for me coming, it's been really interesting because I was involved quite heavily in the ME community for young people back in the late 90s, and I was involved in the ME Association, another organization called AIM, which was like an offshoot that kind of lasted for a while, and I was actually kind of like on a national committee helping to run that organization as it transitioned and stuff, from a young person's perspective in terms of the, like, I used to, like, back in the late 90s, I used to sit with a soldering iron, and I used to cut. My mum used to go to the local like haberdashery place and buy loads of blue ribbon, and I'd just sit there with a soldering iron cutting blue ribbons, and that was my thing. So I was the person that sent out blue ribbons for people to kind of wear, and that was the thing back then. But even then, like, as a young person, I noticed like tensions within things that that sit uncomfortably sometimes with the ME charities, and it's almost like sort of people vying for control, or I don't know what it was back then, but like this was like even before the internet really, but I'd get a letter, like, it was just, I was like, who got my address, because I just like got a random open letter in the post, like criticizing loads of stuff, or kind of like being critical of young people leaving an organization. So for me it was interesting then, after 20 years coming back into the ME community, it feels like it's hard to get a sense of, because I was well for quite a while, and then I became ill in my 30s, and I was like, whoa, there's still a sense within the ME kind of realm that there is so much sort of I've lost my words as well, dispersion, I suppose, in who's doing what. So there's different charities, and you get a feel of this charity might kind of do that, and that charity focuses on this, and what on earth does this charity do, because I can't see what they're doing, or yeah, you're seeing that as a there's somehow a gap in this sense of like, well, we need people on the streets, like you were on the streets on Sunday, and it's almost like our voices aren't being heard because things aren't progressing. There's been damage because of like pace trial and graded exercise and the way that CBT is being used. So yeah, like, it's interesting that you've seen that gap, and you felt actually there needs to be something. And how do you sort of like manage relationships? Do you have relationships with the charities, or is it kind of very, I don't know, is it non-existent in that sense, or?
We were very, when we started, obviously we understand that what needs to be done, the charities do not sometimes effectively have permission to do it, in that they have to abide by certain rules and guidelines to get their funding and to get their status as a charity. So immediately we wanted to be a non-profit organisation, which meant that we didn't have to abide by these rules. And as Steve's just mentioned, it can become quite political, which means we don't get caught up in that. But I think the difference with the charities and the difference with us as an organisation, and what we saw in it, was like you just said, I have all these different diagnoses. So do I do work with the EDS Society? Do I do work with ME? What about my benefits? What about no one charity or no one organisation seemed to have all of that, or even seem to even understand how it all connects. And it does. And it kind of irritates me that the charities and the organisations, it's just about them. It's about what they're coming with. It's just about them. They don't seem to realise, as we've said, the interconnecting, and that was what the collaboration was about. It initially was about trying to get all of these organisations to kind of have some common ground and work on a common, if everybody works together, it will make a difference. It was that sort of attitude, hence it being a collaboration. But unfortunately, it seems very much like they have effectively looked down their nose at us, tried to kind of have a sort of look at first to see what we were doing, and then once they realised what we're doing, they've effectively unfollowed us and don't really want to be associated with us, which is really annoying. But that's kind of what needs to happen. And it's not about, we believe in solidarity, not charity. And if these charities actually wanted to change what they're trying to change, then they wouldn't actually exist as an organisation. So it's almost as if they are deliberately, recently Sonia, I can't remember her surname, had been on TV and is explaining that we still don't know what ME is. And it's, how many years behind are these charities with regards to the science that exists? It's almost as if they're keeping it as a mystery. They're keeping it as so that they can continue these sort of guided exercise therapy, CBT. And I don't know if you noticed today on BBC in the morning on Channel 1, they were actually talking about the amount of people that are off work sick and that the government want to, completely change that. And they were referring to them all being put into effectively what looks like guided exercise therapy and CBT. And they're not putting the bigger picture together. And it kind of slows everything down. And it's almost as if these people are in these positions to keep it like that. It very much feels like that. And, the more you look into this and the more media, journalism and, investigative work that's done, the more you actually discover it's very much like this. And, it's a huge concern to us. So we want to be different. We are doing it for us, by us. We're not doing it as, we'll do it for these people. We're doing our bit, which is very much, again, how a lot of these charities seem to come about. So I think that's the difference with us, and that's why we're doing it the way that we're doing it, because we see that it isn't really being done properly.
Just to chip in, so again, from our backgrounds, we come from a kind of mishmash of kind of anarchist, kind of abolitionist, kind of socialist, kind of we're not one political kind of ideology or way of thinking as such. But it's all very kind of left-wing, kind of radical kind of thinking. And again, the circles we move in and the work that I've done as an independent journalist over the years has been very much influenced by that. And in these kind of progressive circles, charities and non-governmental organisations, NGOs, are not well viewed at all, because effectively they're quite often propping up the system which is causing whatever problem they're campaigning about in the first place. Secondly, they're not the majority of the time acting in 100% the best interests of the people they're claiming to represent. And thirdly, there's always this disconnect between the people they're representing and what they actually want and what the charities and NGOs are coming with. And ultimately, as Nicola said, if these issues were solved, all these people would be out of jobs. So even if it's not explicit, there is this kind of implicit kind of underlying issue that, well, if you actually pulled your effing fingers out and sorted this, well, you wouldn't have any work, would you? And it's kind of like, well, can those two things, solving an issue and the charities actually operating, can that circle be squared? And we're not convinced it can be. And moreover, again, what Nicola pointed out as well, they are restricted by very definition. To register as a charity, you have to follow certain rules and regulations, which is why we did not, because we just want to do what we want and do what is in the best interest of the communities we're involved in, and it means we can rock up outside 5 media outlets. It means we can put together an open letter that people want to back me, which we've done. We're going to publish it in the next few hours. We can platform other organisations. We can say the things charities can't say, but we did reach out to them. When we did the NICE demo back in 2021, we reached out and tried to get these organisations involved. We tried again with Don't Let Me Die. We've been trying this year by, tagging them in, trying to get them involved. Sorry, that's my WhatsApp going off. And the only ones, interestingly, who have actually wanted to work with us are all the long COVID ones. They're great. They want to be involved with what we're doing. Obviously, ME Action, we're friends with them, but they're not a charity. They don't operate like a charity. The long COVID organisations and charities have been great. We have really good relationships with them. So
I think one of the first times I became aware of you, and I don't know if it was last year or if it was earlier than that, was where you were outside Parliament on a very rainy day. Was that the NICE one, or was that something slightly later?
Last year.
Yeah, and it felt like, and I was kind of tweeting and things like that, and I was like, man, I just wish I could stand there in the rain with you guys, because it felt like this is what we need to be doing, like this is what needs to be happening, because voices and I think it felt like me that there was a conspicuous absence of those other organisations that and like you say, maybe they can't, maybe there's different. I want to think the best of these organisations in a sense, don't you? Because they represent us, and they kind of, or they claim to, or and it just felt like, well, surely you could have had one person there with a banner and just standing there with it felt really, it was so encouraging just to see you guys there in the rain, like a handful of you just doing what you're doing, and at the same time it felt quite sad in a way that actually we just wish we could do more to make voices heard, I think, and yeah, when it feels like there's sometimes a lack of coordination, or it's but obviously for the average person, kind of who's just looking in, because we don't know the ins and outs of how these organizations work. We don't know the ins and outs of kind of like who's talking to who, what communication's going on. You get a sense that there's things happening behind the scenes, but we don't get knowledge of what those things are that are happening behind the scenes. There's not a communication of those things very often, or it's like the odd little snippet that you get. So it's and it's great. Things like Decode ME are wonderful in terms of trying to push forwards the research and things like that. But yeah, it feels like on the campaigning side, it feels from the outside that there's something lacking, and yeah, it's much appreciated what you guys are doing. Was there a lot of thought that went into like naming your kind of movement, or was it kind of?
I just want to make one more point, because you just highlighted something quite important. And sorry, this is the journalist in me coming out who'll riff off things you say.
Sorry.
Yes, okay, the charities have been conspicuous by their absence, and there's this idea of, well, things are going on behind the scenes, and we are doing stuff, and they put out statements and so on and so forth, and we've seen this that narrative kind of starting to be broken apart by a lot of people with ME on social media, And the problem with this behind the scenes crap that they keep coming out with, this is not like, I don't know, a Save the Butterflies campaign
No.
or Don't Drop Litter, or I don't know, anything. People are dying. There are literally 2, 3, 4, 5, we don't know how many women. We know there's Millie, Karen and Carla. There are people dying in hospitals, and these people keep saying, well, we're doing stuff behind the scenes. I can tell you, speaking to the families, that is not actually accurate at all. And that will be coming out when those girls are out of hospital. But anyway, behind the scenes is not good enough when there are people dying. This is not some airy... I'm really sure. Sorry, I have a tendency.
It's all right. Actually, it doesn't matter. To be honest, it doesn't matter, because I think it's. I kind of was sort of talking on a previous podcast, because I said when I was sort of planning to talk to you, I said it might be like a bit of a rant fest podcast sort of thing, because I think there's a sense of like a bubbling up within the ME community of people and maybe the chronic illness community that yeah, there is something that feels that feels there's a disconnect. Yeah.
There's a massive disconnect, you know. there are literally people dying. This ain't some nice middle class thing where you can all get together and have a nice fucking round table, which they keep doing, and talk about things. People are dying, and saying you're doing stuff behind the scenes is unacceptable. And this is why. And we're not coming at this from some sort of like PR point of view, or we've thought this through. You asked where the name The Chronic Collaboration came from. Well, that was your idea, wasn't it? Because of the fact that there were all these issues that intersect. But ultimately, we started doing this because someone needs to do it. Someone needs to do it because it's ridiculous. And these cases and all these people who are very severe ME, who are living with horrendous craniocervical atlantoaxial instabilities with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. You know, we're doing some work with chronic urinary tract infection organisation. Again, another issue which there's no NHS guidance for. All these people are living in hell, and no one is A, putting them together, or B, doing anything remotely effective about it at all.
Sorry, apart from the psychiatrists and the DWP and the government.
Oh, yeah.
They've got this down to a T, and they know exactly what they're doing with this, hence this new guidelines now and what's happening with regards to people who are off sick. It's quite obvious where they're going with this, and I know to some it's like that saying, I can't remember the full saying, but it's the one where it's they came for the and I did nothing. Yes. They came for the and I did nothing. They came for me and there was no one to do anything. That's exactly what this is all about. And I know it might sound very idealistic to, oh, come on, if we all work together. But that is the point. If people are kind of picked at individually and, in societies where we're becoming, a very top-down society where we've got 1% and the 99% is effectively where we're going. There's a lot of classism involved and it's picked away at different bits. And the whole point of this was trying to bring all of these issues together because they are interconnected. And it's showing people that if we do come together on these issues, we have more chance of actually tackling them and actually getting real change. Because it isn't just about, getting ME recognised. There's so much more to this. Why is there no upright MRI scanner in the NHS? I've had CT scans, I've had MRI scans, they all come back clear. It was only when we crowdfunded and I was then finally able to go private and have this upright MRI scan where you stand up as opposed to being laying down. And I've got AAI and CCI. I can only imagine how many people in this country are actually living with that. So, a campaign to get that, a campaign like Steve just said, there's no nice guidelines for urinary tract infection. There's also no guidelines for POTS. How many people are suffering with POTS and being told it's mental health? And these all interconnect. So obviously that's, I'm getting quite passionate now, but
no, go for it.
That's what this is about, really, and showing people that this all needs to be worked on and we all need to do it together. What also hasn't been mentioned, what kind of makes us different as well, is Steve is a fantastic journalist, and part of the chronic collaboration is giving people with chronic illness a voice. What Steve is trying to do with this as well is he does Amplify sessions where he's teaching people journalism and trying to teach them how to write for themselves so that more of us are able to change the mainstream media narrative, because that's another thing that needs to be tackled, because everybody else looking in on this doesn't have a clue what's really going on. Someone says, oh yeah, I've got ME. They'll Google it and see what the NHS says. There's no real narratives of where we're coming from. And that's another angle that we have to push and we have to try and do something about. So obviously that's one of the reasons why we're trying to be effectively different with this and trying to not be like a charity where, we rely on mainstream media that continuously puts out a narrative that attacks disabled people anyway. It's useless.
Yeah, and this is the thing, the point of the collaboration, we've become notorious, infamous, well-known, whatever kind of turn of phrase you wish to use for what we do, depending on what quarter you're coming from. We've become well-known already for what we've done around ME, but it was always going to be much broader than that. As Nicola says, we're literally in the middle of doing journalism training now with a group of chronically ill people, as people on Twitter may have seen. It's going to be stuff around DWP, stuff around housing. Housing for chronically ill and disabled people is a massive issue in this country. Again, we've lived it. We're sat in terrible social housing right at this minute. So it's bringing all these issues together, but it's very much what I would say is as well, and I quoted this in an article I wrote, and I said it to someone on Twitter the other day. For me, a lot of how we operate is quite similar to the ACT UP campaign around HIV and AIDS in the 80s and 90s. So ACT UP was a kind of grassroots, bottom-up organisation that came together to basically fight the state and the government in how it was stigmatising HIV and AIDS and mistreating people living with them, and essentially, ignoring what was a pandemic, what was a plague at the time. They didn't fuck around. They went out, blocked roads, got arrested, and were known for doing that. But they actually changed the complete course of HIV and AIDS, and were instrumental in getting us to the point where we're at now, where there is actually treatment and people can live with HIV and AIDS a good quality and long life. And ACT UP were crucial to that. But what was crucial to how they did what they did was that they did not exclude any form of protest, campaigning or activism. They went, look, we're just, and I keep saying this a lot on Twitter, we're just the facilitators of this. If you want to go off and block this road, if you want to go off and harass this politician, if you want to go off and cover this building in paint, if you want to do X, Y, and Z, you go and do it, as long as it is for the cause. We're not going to police how you protest. And in the same way as well, their organisation wasn't political. We're apolitical. We have our own personal political views, because we do, but, it would be wrong and completely unproductive to go, well, we only want, woke lefties, progressives in our organisation. That's not the chronic illness community. We're not shy to that. Chronic illness is not about political ideology. It's about politics, but it's not about political ideology. And so, we're not coming with, well, you can only join us if you believe in X, Y, and Z. That's very important to us. Hence why, if another campaign group needs something doing or needs support with something, we'll be like, yeah, throw it over, we'll do it, we'll support it, which we have been doing. Long COVID Awareness Day, Billboards campaign. As I said, we're getting involved with the Chronic UTI campaign group. That's very important to us. Whatever, by any means necessary, basically.
I'm thinking about I'm actually thinking about my my social work university dissertation that I did kind of back in 2004 or something, and it was I did a dissertation on it was called Pandora's Box: Carers Assessments in Social Work Practice. There's not a duty, but there's a option for social workers to do carers assessments. It's there in legislation, but yet workers and organisations don't want to do those carers assessments because of this sense that there's all this stuff that's going to come out of the Pandora's box when you do them, and then there's no duty to provide anything from that. So it's like, but there's a sense that actually the establishment want everything kept in that box, don't they? Because the more that you unpack the box, the more problems there are for the establishment and for local authorities, for health services, for any sort of organisation that's kind of like having to take on more responsibility. So
that's effectively what I've been saying about psychiatry. It's kind of filled a gap where science hadn't quite caught up yet, and as a result, they have saved the NHS billions and earned millions in the process.
Yeah.
And it's very similar to what you're saying with what has happened, I think.
And it's maybe it's not just about keeping things in the box because it makes life easier. It's also about people potentially profiting from the systems, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a journalist, there's vast evidence of that. Me and Nicola kind of disagree on this. I'm not speaking on behalf of the collaboration at this point. I mean, this is Steve Topple's personal views. Psychiatry is bollocks. The whole thing is a sham.
I don't disagree. I'm all for psychology. I believe in psychology, and there is, and mental health is. I don't want anybody to believe that we don't take mental health seriously. That post-traumatic stress disorder, mental health, and psychology. Yes, we're all for that. But when it comes to psychiatry, that's a whole other side of medicine that we don't have any time.
It's not medicine. It's not medicine.
Yeah.
So it's
medicine.
It's a sham. Psychiatry is a sham. So, for example, PTSD is the prime example of this. PTSD, they know there are changes in how the brain works in post-traumatic stress disorder. That ain't psychiatry. It's neurology.
Yeah.
Why is it psychiatry? It's not. If the brain has changed, that's neurology. Psychiatry is a load of crap. You're either dealing with a neurological issue or you're dealing with a psychological issue. Psychiatry has just been this creation of a group of people who are effectively pushing junk science until the actual science catches up. And like I say, PTSD, they know people's brains alter and the way the brain work changes, which, because it's a natural thing, there's this big movement. We'll be doing some work around PTSD as well. We have someone who we know who's a writer who is very good on what has been going on with PTSD and how it's been treated and so on and so forth. And there's a consensus within a lot of people within the PTSD community that calling it PTSD, the disorder part, is actually really inflammatory and is setting progress on the condition back. Because by default, actually what happens in PTSD is not disordered. It's the brain doing what it should be doing in terms of that, well, actually, so it's the analogy of, if you burn your hand on a hot stove, you don't do it again, do you?
Like
and it's the same with PTSD, that if something is traumatic, the brain adjusts to promote a safety response to that trauma. Therefore, when that response is triggered again, the brain does it as a protective mechanism, which is the body doing what it should be doing. But yeah, anyway, sorry, that was the right tangent. Psychiatry is crap, and the whole thing is junk science. It's either neurology or psychology. Anyway.
And that helps kind of put into context. I mean, even just on our last episode, talking to Eliza Charlie, and she talked about her experiences of brain retraining, kind of like programs that she'd been involved with. And if you haven't, for any listeners or viewers, like, go back and watch that, because it's so enlightening in terms of the way that those systems kind of gaslight people into disbelieving what's going on in your own body, in a sense, don't they? It's like, it's almost like, well, it's trauma, or there's aspects. And I don't know, what are your thoughts? I think you've just said it, but like, your thoughts on this kind of mind body thing, like, because we know that, like, with ME, it's like I know that when I'm stressed, that impacts my body. So there is an element of stress impacting our kind of immune systems and stuff, I suppose. I don't know. Is there? I don't know. It's a very difficult one, isn't it?
I've said this to Steve quite a few times. I spent a hell of a long time during my sort of teens and 20s genuinely wondering if I had some sort of split personality disorder or something more kind of mental health, because of the constant symptoms that I was having and how they fluctuated. And then sometimes I'd be absolutely fine and I'd be able to get on with things. And in other times I'd be absolutely exhausted. And it used to make me quite down. It used to make me quite, and it genuinely made me question what was going on with my mental health, because I was repeatedly being told that, whoever I went and saw and whatever tests were being done, they repeatedly come back as, no, there's nothing wrong, no, you're fine. And it left me sort of very much in my own head, questioning my own sanity and questioning my own. And it took a while after getting the diagnoses to actually sort of realise to myself that actually, that I'm not mad. It isn't, because I've questioned it so much over the years. Why am I not getting anywhere? I'm feeling all of this. And there'd be times sometimes where I'd be laying in bed and go to get up and I physically couldn't move. And I used to get palpitations. My GP told me that this was anxiety. Obviously, once we got things properly diagnosed, it turned out it was epilepsy. I was having epileptic attacks. I was having a seizure in my sleep. And when I was having the palpitations, they were actually focal seizures. But this was, repeatedly told that, oh, it's anxiety, you're anxious. So as Steve said, with post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a very important part of this because of the years of people going through, the years of misdiagnosis, the years of then questioning their own. I think it's a very important part of this. And I've not yet had any post-traumatic stress therapy or anything to kind of go through that. But I do believe that there is going to be a huge amount of people in the EDS community, in POTS communities, in ME communities that, after the years of having to go through misogyny and, classism, whatever's happened, to not get their correct diagnoses, they are going to then need some form of support. But, CBT is not the support that they need. That's not the type of therapy that is going to help them in any way, shape or form. And that's the difference. I think it's been very confused, and it's just been under the label of mental health, and it's allowed psychiatry to effectively take over and disregard actual neurological health and actual, real mental health within people who are doing what a human body would do, which is what Steve was explaining. We react to things and learn whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. If we keep going through things and it's bad, it's going to have an impact on us. But yeah, I mean, we want to be able to kind of connect all of this together. And obviously we want to take on the psychiatry lobby. We want to make sure that NICE guidelines are properly changed, and effectively I'd like to look into changing laws on things and trying to find out whether or not we would be able to do that with certain conditions. For example, being given a fibromyalgia diagnosis, there should be standard tests that are done. A POTS test should be done, an EDS diagnosis should be considered, things like that before somebody is given a diagnosis that then leaves them left for years with no real support, no real help. And just looking into that side of things is probably something, over the next sort of 2 to 5 years, where we want to go, what we want to do. But again, we can only really do this with everybody else's support. We can't just do this ourselves. We need members, we need, people. We want to do this, and we can't do it without everybody else. It isn't just us, it's all of us. So, yeah.
Just to pick up on, I want to pick up on the point you said about stress.
Yeah, go on. Yeah,
because immune system. Because of course this is a tricky. That's one example of what is actually a very tricky path to navigate. With the idea of dismissing the psychological and mental health within chronic illness, when undeniably it can have an impact. But ultimately, it's cause and effect. I can, my stress levels are through the roof half the time, but it doesn't make me sicker. Therefore, surely the appropriate responses for someone like yourself who lives with ME and stress makes them sicker, the appropriate response from medical professionals would not be to say, well, you need to manage your stress better. It would be to say, well, let's find a cure for your fucking chronic illness then.
Yeah.
It's not hard. It's really not hard. That is a get-out clause for medical professionals to go, well, you need to learn to manage your stress better. Why should you have to change your behaviour because of the fact the medical profession has gaslit and used junk science for decades to mask the reality of what you are living with? That ain't your problem. You know,
it shouldn't be.
But it is. But it is your problem. Therefore, by default, which I'm very much of the opinion that psychology in terms of mental health and neurology in terms of mental health, of course, definitely has its place. I was, I'm quite open about it. I was correctly sectioned back in 2011 because I had psychosis. I'm the first one. I have actual lived experience of actual mental health. So I'm not coming at this from some ivory tower with regards to it. I've lived through it. However, there is a time and place for it, and in the realms of chronic illness, it should be a secondary. It's like Dr. Sarah Myhill says it very well. Actually, she doesn't dismiss therapy for ME patients. What she says is get them fucking in better health first. It should not be your first port of call. It should be secondary to deal with the hell and the trauma that you have gone through from being chronically ill and being gaslit and dismissed and left to rot for decades. Not to treat part of your condition, but to retreat the resulting trauma of your condition. So
I kind of really hope that the stuff that you're saying is, and I guess it's in a roundabout way. It's encouraging people. I hope, because there's a sense of like affirmation here, isn't there? For that actually we want to be saying to people, actually, like, do you know what you're going through? Like we acknowledge that and we see that, and it's about being seen and heard in terms of the very real physical things that are going on in our bodies that aren't that aren't just in our heads or whatever. It's really hard. Before we finish, do you want to tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing with? You mentioned Millie and Carla earlier, and you've been like up and down the country, literally up and down the country, haven't you? And standing outside hospitals and things, and like it's so appreciated that there's a need for like righteous anger, isn't there? There is a need for expression of that when we're literally seeing, like you said, there may be many more individuals who are being mistreated by the system, and there seems to be a nature that there's just not an unwillingness to take on board and just be compassionate. Is that a sense that you get?
Like you just said, I think it's important to acknowledge that the cases that we've been involved in it sounds wrong, the patients that we've been helping are just effectively the tip of the iceberg. And the only reason they're getting the support is because their parents have acknowledged that there's something wrong here. I can only imagine the amount of people who, parents are frustrated. Oh, come on, what's wrong with you? Oh, come on, the doctor says it's fine. There are so many people living in, because again, the statistics of how many people are now off sick as opposed to before the pandemic to after the pandemic is incredibly obvious that there's been a huge increase, and it almost fits with, the estimate of how many people are living with long COVID. So there are so many people in this position. It kind of almost terrifies me to think what situation some people are in where they don't have the support. And we literally only know the tip of the iceberg here. So it's about making sure that these are what we're saying, our voices, all of us are being heard, so that people then realise, because when you really think about it, it's literally like when you look back at older times in history, and people were being sectioned for having seizures, people were being sectioned, the way people with TB were being treated, as Steve said, people with AIDS and HIV. This is what we're experiencing. The problem is the public itself don't quite realise this yet, don't quite realise, hold on, that's not right, they shouldn't be doing that to them, because it's just been kept the way that it has through psychiatry. That's what we need to break. It's for us, it's what we're focusing on and what we need to focus on. It's not just about because we end up in a bubble. The community ends up effectively in a bubble, and we need to break that bubble. We need to get this out to other people and get them involved to be able to stop. That's when a movement kind of steps over and becomes a proper movement and things change. that's effectively what we need to, I think, work on. And over past campaigns have realised that it's about doing things like that. We were out Sunday, we were out campaigning, and I was leafleting, and there was a woman that came up, like you said, about, people needing to realise that it isn't all in their head. There was a lady that approached us with her husband, and she was on crutches, and she said, "Oh, what's this?" And I said, it's ME, World ME Day, and it's to do with ME, and it's to do with long COVID. They're post-viral illnesses. She was like, "I've got long COVID." And I just looked at her and I said to her, "I know it's not all in your head." And she just hugged me. Never met her before, probably will never see her again. But this is what we need to focus on more than anything. I think it's not necessarily about our community as such, it's getting out of the community and getting it to the wider world to actually make the differences and make people want to help us effectively.
Yeah, exactly. Millie, Carla and Karen, while they are, right here, right now, an absolute priority, I've made it explicitly clear when I've been speaking to Millie and Carla's family, this is not just about them, unfortunately. And, our immediate focus has been for weeks now, because it has been weeks, has been on them. But I also have conveyed to the family that it is not just about them. There are far bigger issues at play here with their situations. And it is about breaking outside the bubble. As Nicola said, back to the ACT UP campaign in the 80s and 90s, Larry Kramer, one of the founders of it, said, he was known as the angriest man in the world. But him being angry made damn good television and got that movement outside of the LGBTQIA plus community and into wider discourse, which is what needs to happen. And it's what needs to happen with this. Everyone said now 4 years this has been going on. People have been saying for 4 years that the pandemic and long COVID was, an opportunity for chronic illness, for that discourse to break out of just these small little echo chambers. Unfortunately, that still hasn't happened, I don't think. Even though, as Nicola pointed out, just as we're filming this, the figures that have come out about people who are economically inactive, that is not working or not looking for work, the rise is almost completely tallies with the number of people living with long COVID who cannot work, who are not looking for work. So I did those figures yesterday for an article, and the rise is almost identical. And yet this still hasn't broken out. And we're back to this issue of it's been too polite. We have to and we will break this issue out of just certain circles and certain bubbles. But it's not an overnight thing, It requires an incremental, for want of a much better word, incremental increases in how we do campaigning, and going out and actually being outside the media for World ME Day was just a slight incremental increase. You're going to see from us more and more and more and more, and upping the ante of what we do and how we do it as time progresses. But as Nicola points out as well, we do need support to do this. We can't, I work full time at the Canary.
Basically, we're up for it, but we need the support to do it.
Yeah, which is why we launched the website. We've been doing this for years. We got a call out with regards to Millie. Millie's family approached us. We didn't approach them. Then off the back of Millie, Carla's family approached us. We didn't approach them. We're now actually talking. We're talking to a third case, which isn't in the public eye yet as well. But I work full time. She is really, she calls herself greedy sometimes because she's got more chronic conditions than most people. So
I think I take more tablets than most people. I quite often say that I rattle.
Yeah, but we do need support with this, and we don't want to come out and openly say it, but we may as well. If you're giving money, your money could be better placed elsewhere, because we will actually do something visible with it. So we do need support. We can't deny that, because we can't do what we want to be doing at the level we need to be doing it, like consistently voluntarily. And we also, Hannah came out on Sunday as well, and Hannah's been repeatedly supporting us. Hannah lives with ME as well. We have to, we will do this, and we'll continue to do it anyway, regardless of whether people support us or not. I know what we're like. We'll just, we'll continue to do it. But
we can't not do this, but
to do it properly,
everyone wants this to be, please support us, because we're going to try and make this as good as we can, and we are going to try and change things. That's what this is about. To be fair, I'm disabled, I have seizures, and I don't really think I'm going to get employed anywhere, to be fair. I'm not really sure about that, so this will be my full-time job, and I hope I'm able to, I'm learning different social medias. I've got my first Instagram account this week, which I've never been on Instagram before. So, we are trying to do this as well as we can, but we do, we are literally sitting in a terrace, two up, two down council house in the middle of South London. So, we need support as much as we want to, just take this on and get on with it and do it all. We can't do everything on our own. So with everything we're saying, if people do believe where we're coming from and believe that this is what is needed, please support us, because that's the only way we're going to really do this. We can't do this on our own. We need everyone's support as well.
Yeah, because we've had enough, and we know everyone else has had enough. So if you've had enough as much as we've had enough, then get on board with us, and we'll all have had enough together.
I think what's great about your approach is that it's instilling a sort of sense. I know for like me, I'm trying to find the word again because I don't want to use the word inspired, but it motivate. Maybe no, that's the wrong word. I think for many of us with ME, we've been beaten down and psychologically because of the kind of gaslighting, the kind of the way that we've been treated. It's not apathy, it's exhaustion, I think, for physically and systemically, I think for many of us, and I think what you're doing is like it, and it's like you said, it's not all about you, but we need allies as well, don't we? And I think that's for so many of us with ME that, like, I know, like, seeing on Twitter and stuff, people and it happened exactly to me. I posted about ME World ME Day on Facebook, and the amount of likes or comments or anything from people that aren't within the ME community, friends of mine that are on my Facebook wall, very few retweets, very few likes. Like, I've got a small handful of friends that don't have ME that check in on me or message me. It's a very small number of people that actually go out of the way, and it feels like it's hard to know what people are thinking, isn't it, in terms of like, oh, that's ME, and there's the need for a societal change in perception about the reality of the condition, isn't there? And I think that's what you're trying to do, and I think we see that and we appreciate that, and I think for people that are listening or watching, do go and support. Like, I haven't, we're, as a podcast, we've sort of tried to stay neutral, but I would say, like, if you're going to go and support somebody, hop on board. What I'll do is I'll put links to your website. Brand new website's just come out. There's like some really good resources that are going to go onto there about like navigating the benefit system and things like that. There's so much that you've got planned going forward, isn't there? So it's exciting. It is exciting, and it's encouraging, and it'll be great to see kind of where things go forward, and I hope there's that you can look, in a year or two's time, we can look back and see the impact, that there is some positive change that has been progressed, and it would be great if we see maybe some change in the established organisations to see that things need to move on and progress, and the world isn't the same as it was 20 years ago. We need proactive social media stuff. We need kind of people that are speaking on behalf of not just the ME community, but and I love this sort of the aspect of there is such an there are interconnectednesses between the different conditions often, and I think that's the way that you're sewing things together will be really good. So yeah, is there anything you want to add before we finish?
Just that we, as you said about the other intersecting conditions, we've also been doing because it's also EDS Awareness Month, we've been doing a zebra challenge. So I don't know if anybody has seen the zebra challenge, but on the days that I am not well, Steve has been doing it for us. And I think the latest one was Steve in a miniskirt. So yeah, check them out, because we've had quite a lot of feedback on them, and they seem to be going down quite well.
I would have worn something zebra print today, but I thought no, there's nothing in the house that's zebra print whatsoever. Yeah. So yeah, it's been good. It's been good to watch. It's been fun, and I think there is an aspect of that, isn't there? Trying to bring a sense of fun to the whole thing as well, which is good. So
definitely.
Yeah. Well, brilliant. Thanks a lot. And
thank you for having us.
Thank you, Dan, for having us. It is appreciated.
It's been really good to talk, so thanks.
You do great work with your podcast as well. So we're pleased to be on here, aren't we?
Yeah. So. Thanks for coming. It's been good.
Thank
Cheers.
you.